Hyde, I think 1950 or 1949 with Tyrone Power and Susan Hayward. And in that one I had
Jack Elam, the unmistakable villainous face of Hollywood. A man with legendary misaligned eyes who left his mark on hundreds of films. But did you know that behind his humorous smile and open personality, Elam harbored the deepest dislike for a renowned star? That star was none other than Gary Cooper, the cinematic icon celebrated worldwide. So, why couldn't Jack Elam stand Cooper? Let's find out. In an era when Hollywood churned out westerns with assembly line precision, Elam's face became synonymous with danger, menace, and unpredictability. He was the outlaw lurking in the saloon's shadows, the gunfighter whose crooked stare unnerved both hero and audience, and the desperado who embodied the raw chaos of frontier justice. Films like Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, or Support Your Local Sheriff, 1969, exemplified his capacity to distill menace into a single glance, a half smile, or a seemingly lazy gesture. That wandering eye, so different from the sculpted perfection of Hollywood's leading men, was not a hindrance, but a gift. It gave him a presence that no camera could ignore. For audiences, Jack Elam was not just acting a villain, he was the villain. And yet, to reduce Elam's legacy to the Western antagonist would be to overlook his true genius: versatility. Hollywood, particularly during the mid-20th century, was notoriously reluctant to allow actors to escape typecasting. Once an actor became the villain, opportunities outside that box often disappeared. But Elam resisted those chains with an almost rebellious creativity. He proved himself capable of inhabiting a broad range of characters, transcending the flat caricatures often written for men of his appearance. Consider his foray into comedy. In the 1970s and 80s, when the Western genre was beginning to wane, Elam reinvented himself by embracing humor. His performances revealed impeccable comedic timing, a sharp sense of irony, and a willingness to parody the very image that had made him famous. In The Cannonball Run, 1981, Elam abandoned the grim desperado persona to deliver a delightfully absurd, almost clownish performance, showing audiences that behind the intimidating glare was an actor of wit and surprising lightness. Sitcom appearances further highlighted his adaptability, proving that he could hold his own not only with six-shooters and cowboy hats, but also with laugh tracks and studio audiences. This ability to cross genres was not simply a career strategy. It was a statement. Elam was quietly but persistently challenging Hollywood's tendency to pigeonhole its performers. He demonstrated that the same actor who could terrify audiences in a darkened theater could just as easily make them laugh on a Sunday evening. By doing so, he secured a place not just as a Western villain, but as a fully realized, multidimensional performer. A rarity in an industry addicted to stereotypes. The recognition of his contribution came formally in 1994 when Elam was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. This honor was more than ceremonial. It was an acknowledgement that Elam had become integral to the mythology of the American West as imagined on screen. His villains, while fearsome, were not merely foils for the hero. They were part of the cinematic DNA that shaped the genre. To watch a Western without a character like Elam's was, in many ways, to watch a Western missing its essential tension. But his legacy extends beyond the Western. Elam's career forces us to reconsider the very notion of stardom in Hollywood. He was not the polished matinee idol, nor the conventional leading man whose image graced posters and magazine covers. Instead, he carved out a space defined by authenticity, eccentricity, and adaptability. His rise reminds us that Hollywood, for all its obsession with perfection, has always had room for those who defy its rules, those who turn supposed flaws into unforgettable trademarks. What makes Jack Elam's story compelling today is precisely this subversion. In a modern entertainment industry that continues to grapple with issues of representation, typecasting, and the value of unconventional beauty, Elam's career stands as both a caution and an inspiration. He accepted typecasting when it served him, but refused to be limited by it. He leaned into what made him different, and instead of letting it restrict him, he transformed it into a career-defining strength. When audiences remember Elam, they often recall the glint of mischief in his wandering eye, the way he could command attention with a single smirk, or the comic absurdity he later embraced with gusto. But beneath those surface impressions lies the deeper truth of a man who embodied the contradictions of Hollywood itself. Formulaic, yet innovative. Typecast, yet versatile. Fearsome, yet endearing. In the end, Jack Elam was not just another Western villain, nor merely a character actor lost in a sea of studio productions. He was a reminder that in Hollywood, greatness is often found not in conforming to expectations, but in transcending them. His induction into the Hall of Great Western Performers was less about honoring a man with a long resume, and more about celebrating an actor who, through craft, resilience, and a touch of mischief, became an indelible part of American cinematic history. If Jack Elam's screen persona was defined by menace, unpredictability, and comic eccentricity, his personal life painted a strikingly different portrait. Behind the crooked glare and outlaw swagger lived a man who, by most accounts, was remarkably grounded, open, and deeply cherished by those who worked alongside him. Hollywood, often a place where professional masks are worn as tightly as costumes, was accustomed to actors whose on-screen temperaments bled into their reputations. Yet Elam was the exception. Where audiences saw a desperado, colleagues discovered warmth and candor. Stories from fellow actors and directors consistently highlight Elam's unpretentious nature. He was blunt without cruelty, straightforward in an industry known for its doublespeak. Unlike many character actors who carried resentments about typecasting, Elam was pragmatic. He understood the currency of his uniqueness. The crooked eye that had branded him a villain in the Western boom years was, in his view, simply another tool, an asset he wielded with both precision and humor. Off-camera, this attitude manifested in generosity. Younger actors often recalled how Elam would dispense advice without pretense, demystifying the business rather than cloaking it in ego. He was, as many described, approachable in a profession that thrives on distance. His personal life, though less publicized, revealed resilience in the face of hardship. Elam married his first wife, Jean-Louise Hodgard, in the early 1930s, long before Hollywood fame redefined his life. Their marriage carried him through his formative years in the industry, grounding him during a time when work was uncertain and roles often fleeting. But tragedy struck in 1961 when Jean succumbed to cancer. For a man so outwardly tough and composed, the loss was devastating. Friends later recalled how deeply the event marked him, not just as a personal sorrow, but as a reminder of how fragile life remained, even for those living in Hollywood's glare. That same year, fate offered a second chapter. Elam married Margaret M. Jennison, who would remain by his side for more than 4 decades. The longevity of their marriage was itself unusual in Hollywood, an industry infamous for fleeting unions and turbulent relationships. Their bond, lasting 42 years until Elam's death, was a testament to stability amidst a career defined by constant change. It suggested that the actor who so often played rootless men on screen found his true anchor at home. As his career slowed in the 1990s, Elam retreated from the relentless pace of film sets to a quieter life. He settled in Ashland, Oregon, a town whose unassuming charm seemed to suit him perfectly. There, far from the sound stages of Los Angeles, Elam spent his later years in relative peace. Colleagues who visited him noted that he remained sharp, humorous, and still fascinated by the industry that had both pigeonholed and celebrated him. Retirement did not strip him of identity. It simply allowed him to live without performance. On October 20th, 2003, Jack Elam died at the age of 82, the cause listed as congestive heart failure. His passing in the modest comfort of his Ashland home marked the end of a life that had traversed the extremes of Hollywood: typecasting, reinvention, acclaim, and obscurity. The news of his death prompted a wave of reflections across the industry, not merely about the hundreds of roles he played, but about the man himself. Tributes emphasized not just his eccentric brilliance as an actor, but also his honesty, wit, and humanity away from the cameras. To understand the weight of Elam's passing, one must consider the cultural moment in which it occurred. By 2003, the Western genre, once the beating heart of American cinema, had long since receded into nostalgia. Its golden age was a memory, its iconic figures aging or gone. ELAM's death symbolized more than the loss of a single performer. It marked another closing chapter in the era of mythic storytelling that Hollywood had built around the American frontier. He was, in many ways, one of the last surviving bridges between the classical westerns of the mid-20th century and the more revisionist interpretations that followed. His absence reminded audiences of how much that era had depended on figures like him, actors whose very presence on screen defined the stakes of the story. Yet, ELAM's story resists simple categorization as a relic of a bygone genre. His career and personal journey embody the contradictions that make Hollywood endlessly fascinating. He was the villain who inspired laughter, the intimidating outlaw who lived a life of loyalty and devotion, the man with a flawed face who turned it into a career-defining trademark. In his personal choices, remaining approachable, building lasting relationships, and facing tragedy with resilience, he revealed a dimension often hidden from the public eye. Perhaps the greatest testament to his legacy lies in the affection with which his peers remembered him. In an industry that often reduces actors to box office numbers or critical acclaim, ELAM's reputation rested on something rarer: respect. He was admired not only for what he brought to the screen, but for the integrity he carried off it. His crooked eye may have made him Hollywood's favorite villain, but it was his character, his loyalty as a husband, his humility as a colleague, his humor as a friend, that made him unforgettable. If Jack Elam's personal life reflected warmth and loyalty, his professional opinions revealed a sharp, unapologetic edge. Among the many names he encountered during his long tenure in Hollywood, one in particular drew his ire more than any other: Gary Cooper. To most of the world, Cooper was the quintessential American leading man, a towering figure in cinematic history, celebrated for his understated style and his iconic performances in films like High Noon, 1952. But to Elam, he was little more than a fraud, a hollow emblem of Hollywood's obsession with appearance over substance. Elam never cloaked his disdain. In interviews and conversations, he described Cooper as a manufactured idol, a man praised for doing remarkably little. Where critics and audiences saw naturalism, Elam saw laziness. Cooper's ability to simply stand still, deliver a few words in a soft voice, and be hailed as a genius of restraint infuriated Elam. For an actor who built his career clawing for every role, often buried deep in the cast list, the industry's fawning over Cooper felt like an insult not only to him, but to countless hardworking character actors who shouldered the weight of Hollywood storytelling. Part of Elam's resentment stemmed from what he perceived as Cooper's work ethic, or lack thereof. While Elam approached roles with the grit of a craftsman, willing to adapt, experiment, and embody even the smallest parts, Cooper seemed to glide effortlessly through stardom. To Elam, this was not evidence of genius, but of entitlement. He believed Cooper leaned heavily on his striking looks, his tall frame, and his star aura, rather than investing the labor required to sharpen craft. In Elam's eyes, Hollywood rewarded Cooper not for what he did on screen, but for what he was off-screen: handsome, aloof, and marketable. What deepened the rift further was Cooper's demeanor toward those around him. Elam, who valued camaraderie and respect across every level of a film set, was reportedly enraged by what he perceived as Cooper's arrogance. Stories circulated of Cooper treating supporting actors and crew members with a cool detachment, offering little acknowledgement to those who were not part of Hollywood's elite circle. For Elam, who had spent decades inhabiting the roles of henchmen, drifters, and comic foils, this dismissal of the working class of Hollywood actors was unforgivable. He carried himself with the belief that no role was too small, that every cog in the machine mattered. Cooper, in contrast, seemed to embody the hierarchy Elam despised: stars at the top, everyone else disposable. The breaking point for Elam's contempt was the industry's near-universal praise of Cooper's Academy Award-winning role in High Noon. While critics lauded Cooper's performance as Marshal Will Kane, a man abandoned by his town and forced to face danger alone, Elam dismissed it outright. To him, the role required little more than standing tall and projecting stoicism, a feat hardly worthy of the industry's highest honor. The Oscar, in ELAM's judgment, was a glaring symbol of Hollywood's inequities, the system that showered accolades on leading men while treating supporting actors as footnotes, regardless of their contributions. ELAM's disdain for Cooper was more than a personal grudge. It was a reflection of the broader cultural divide within Hollywood. His critique illuminated the tension between two classes of performers: the stars, whose images fueled the studios, and the character actors, whose work added texture and authenticity but rarely earned recognition. In many ways, ELAM's animosity toward Cooper was less about the man himself and more about what he represented. Cooper was the face of Hollywood's favoritism, the golden boy whose every gesture was celebrated, while actors like ELAM carried the burden of playing villains, eccentrics, and side characters without ever being truly seen. This contrast is especially telling when one considers the paths the two men took. Cooper, though undeniably influential, often remained an enigma, distant, inscrutable, his less is more approach becoming a kind of mythology. ELAM, conversely, poured energy into every role, no matter how minor, ensuring that his characters lived and breathed. While Cooper was celebrated for restraint, ELAM believed in presence, using his body, his eyes, his timing to create moments that stayed with audiences long after the credits rolled. For ELAM, it was maddening that restraint could win Oscars while vibrancy and labor often went unrewarded. The bitterness also reveals a fascinating paradox within ELAM himself. Despite his disdain for Cooper, ELAM was not bitter about his own career. He seemed content with the niche he occupied, aware that his crooked eye and rough-hewn features had given him a singular path. What he could not tolerate was the idea that Hollywood mistook minimal effort for brilliance. In his judgment, Cooper symbolized the injustice of an industry that equated beauty with talent. And yet, ELAM's critique, harsh as it was, remains part of what makes his story compelling. In voicing such disdain for one of Hollywood's untouchable icons, ELAM reinforced his own identity as an outsider, unafraid to puncture myths that others accepted. His loathing of Cooper may have been personal, but it also gave voice to a sentiment shared by many unsung performers: that the system was rigged in favor of the photogenic and the privileged, while the true artisans were left in the shadows. In hating Cooper, more than anyone else, ELAM was not simply venting. He was articulating a philosophy, a belief that respect in acting should be earned through craft, commitment, and humility, not handed out because of bone structure and box office draw. For all his villainous roles, perhaps Jack Elam's most rebellious act was refusing to bow to Hollywood's sacred idols. He may never have won an Oscar, but he won something rarer: the admiration of peers who knew the difference between myth and substance. What do you think about Jack Elam's perspective on Gary Cooper? Do you agree with his opinion that Cooper has been overly glorified? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to discover more fascinating stories about the world of celebrities.